Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 4 of ITEC 4242 Database Administration, brought to you by Middle Georgia State University. I am your instructor, Aaron Hill, and we're going to be discussing creating groups. I am sure you all are excited about this as we are getting into February and getting along in the semester. We're going to be looking at the final project pretty soon. Not quite yet. I do not have the master document for that. But to summarize what your groups are going to be like, or your group project is going to be like, rather, the final project will be a culmination of the things that you learn in this class, whether concept or coding, whatever you've dealt with. I'm going to have you guys create a master standards, policies, and design document, kind of detailing a database system from whether it includes a diagram of your database structure, which we have not covered yet in the semester. I will be going over MySQL Workbench and some of the quirks that it has so that you can actually just kind of like take whatever your design is, spit it out in a diagram really quickly, and basically put it in a document and explain your reasoning why you designed it that way and what it's going to do for the company. As far as the standards and policies are concerned, this will include security, backup and disaster recovery, um, organizational needs as far as users, who's going to be participating in the database, who are the stakeholders, so on and so forth. I will go into more detail when I actually release the document, but that's in the works. For now, we're going to be focusing on creating groups because Chapter 6 is about design reviews, which for the quick and dirty version of it is a group of individuals that are stakeholders that have skin in the game, whether from tech side or organizational side, that come together and discuss the needs for design changes and needs of the company concerning applications, databases, so on. Now, if you haven't noticed yet, the title of this video has part 1 in it. There will be 2 videos. I'm actually going to change formats because the last video was about an hour and a half, and editing, if I can say the word, editing it was a nightmare. Any sort of changes between documents or pauses that I may have that I was trying to cut out, I only had about 3 changes that I made in the last video, not including the annotations to kind of shortcut to different points in the video, whether it was between chapters or the module and discussing it. It was monstrous. I literally had to go to bed for like 8 hours, get up, and then keep making changes because that's how long it took to accommodate. I mean, like probably maybe like 5 minutes of cut content. That's kind of extreme. So I'm going to split this between textbook and module. I will be covering triggers, procedures, and functions in the next video in the part 2. But right now we're going to be discussing chapter 6 and 7. As far as chapter 6 is concerned, the design review, the group of individuals that meet together, they get together in order to assess the efficiency, effectiveness, accuracy, just the overall needs of the company when it comes to software and design. Now, in order for a select group of people to come together, you're going to have people that have different viewpoints, perspective, goals, and so on and so forth. So you're going to have to come up with the rules of engagement because you don't want your meetings to devolve into just yelling matches and just an argument between two people that just go back and forth, or two groups, or people that are just like throwing a monkey wrench into your situation. You want to create a rules of engagement when creating your group to make sure that you come to a consensus. Even if you disagree, you need to actually keep pushing forward. So how do you actually do that? Do you democratically vote for what is considered the best idea? Do you sleep on it and have everybody come back after more research has been rendered? Do you play rock paper scissors? What are the rules of engagement for a design review? Now, as far as the participants in a design review, there are the leader, scribe, mediator, and the participants. And this is what we're going to be modeling our final project groups after. The leader, in the case of a design review, is the individual that kind of leads the meeting, makes sure that everybody gets to say, that all the topics are covered as necessary so that the agenda is met and it's all productive. Everything gets covered that needs to be covered. As far as your groups are concerned, the leader is going to be your main communicator, as far as whether it's to send me an email by the end of the week, the list of individuals that are in your groups, and I'm gonna create a discussion board for you all to start kind of congregating together and figure out who do you want. It's going to be 7 groups of 4. So if you get 4 people, email me, let me know. If you have like 3 people and you need like an extra and you don't really get it by the end of the week, I'll probably assign whoever's left out. Uh, there are approximately 28 people, so it's going to be about 7 groups of 4. So give or take, depending on circumstances. But the leader of your group is going to be the one to go to the Dropbox and turn in documentation, such as the rough draft that I will be grading. Well, I won't be grading the rough draft. I will critique it and give it back to you so that you can make whatever changes that you need to. Um, the leader may be the individual that you designate for creating a file share of some sort, such as Google Drive or Dropbox, where you share your documentation. Because the final project is basically a glorified master document of your standards, policies, and design aspects of a database. It's going to be all encompassing of the concepts and coding that we are reviewing through the semester. I'm going to give you a scenario, and you're going to build a system around it and include your standards and policies concerning how end users are going to communicate with IT, how you accommodate changes, what are your security standards, disaster and backup recovery. I said that backwards. It was backup and disaster recovery, so on and so forth. But I will give the full details in a document fairly soon. But the one of the objectives for the week is simply to create the group for this and designate, and you can all work out the details. I'm gonna have you all create a document next week, and that will take the place of the discussion next week. As far as the membership of the design review is concerned, you're gonna, and again, your group is gonna want one of these: a scribe, somebody to take down meeting minutes, to discuss, to document who's responsible for what, who attended what meetings, How often did you meet? And each group is going to get a discussion board, and I expect to see week to week or however often you designate a basically a shared meeting minutes document to show that everybody's participating, everybody's attending, and this is what we're doing to get the project done. Now, if you're following along in the textbook and following along with the coding and all, it if you keep up with like different aspects each week, your final project is going to actually be pretty straightforward as long as you accommodate the various aspects of it. You're going to do well. So you might want to meet on a regular basis, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, whatever. That's up to you. As far as a design review, a mediator is somebody that maybe from outside of the group that kind of steps in, somebody that doesn't actually have skin in the game, that can be impartial. In extreme cases, that would be me. For all of you, that if there are some really bad issues going on in your group, you can come to me about it. As long as you're doing your meeting minutes, showing like what work is being accomplished and who's not doing what. I'm sure we can address that. And the final members of a design review are the participants, all the other people in the group, in reference to you guys. For the instance of a design review, it includes anybody that has skin in the game, that anywhere from tech support, database administrators, representative end users from each of the departments, that they like, whether it's HR or the business office or whatever departments that your company would have. Um, Types of design reviews include conceptual, logical, physical, organizational, SQL and application, code, pre-implementation, post-implementation. And yes, I just read down a list, but to kind of go over what each of these are, conceptual is basically you don't really have anything yet, but you may perceive a need um, or a need for a change in your company. You may find that there's redundancy in your applications and you're spending too much money, and you may be able to consolidate your resources and say, okay, this application over here could accomplish the same job as these three applications, or vice versa. uh, can we effectively make a change? And it's conceptual. It's merely, hey, we have a potential issue or change possibility. Let's talk about it. The logical design is really the pretty layout of how is this going to be fleshed out? Is it third normal form? Is it, how is it going to be organized? How is it going to affect it? Well, that's more organizational, but basically just getting down to what tables are going to be made, where is it going to be organized at, in the database structure. The physical design would be what kind of hardware requirements are you going to need, how much space, how much processing power, so on and so forth. Organizational, what kind of impact does it have on your end users? As far as Mildred Estate, does this affect financial aid? Does this affect bursar's office? Does this affect admissions? You know, while it may help one, it may hinder others. You want to have all your departments represented to kind of to share the load, to understand what each of their needs are. SQL and application code design reviews that might be in the IT department itself. It's like, well, you know, if you're proactive, you may decide, okay, well, if we ever come in the future and we're going to need to make a change because this code isn't as efficient as possible, or if they add columns to a table, as we're going to discuss here in a little bit, um, in the next chapter, is it going to break stuff, or so on and so forth. If you have a system that you're going to put in place, you're going to probably want a design review beforehand to say, okay, does everybody have everything in place so that stuff doesn't break and we're not, messing up our end users, messing up our clients, so on and so forth. And post implementation is, okay, the learning lessons. Okay, we managed to do this right. We did this wrong. We did this efficiently. We could have done a little bit better, so on and so forth. Okay, additional considerations. Say, for example, if you have third-party software for Middle Georgia State, we have Nelnet and StarRes and all sorts of other third-party software. You may have to communicate with them to say, okay, we're going to be moving servers. We're going to have firewall exceptions between our servers. Please put a firewall exception on your end. We'll have one on our end, so that the servers can effectively communicate with one another. Another additional concern that design reviews may need to have, or it, having some sort of replacement should somebody like no longer work there. If Steve knows everything and he decides, man, this job really blows for the pay that I'm getting, I can get paid twice as much over here and do less work, is your company going to fumble because he's gone? Like, are there documents that kind of detail the procedures that Steve would have done? Is there a fallback guy? Is there somebody that, like a junior, if you will, that follows in the steps of Steve, that worked with Steve, that knows how to actually accomplish his job? You want to be able to keep the business running without hindering your end users. Now, as far as database change management, this is chapter 7 going on. And database change, as the cliche kind of points out at the very beginning, the only constant in today's complex business environment is change. The only constant is change. And I would actually say that extends outside of the business environment. Like, everything in this world changes. I mean, quite honestly, if anybody looked at my resume right now, it's kind of almost Swiss cheese, to be perfectly honest, because I went to school at Macon State College and I worked for Middle Georgia College. Now that's Middle Georgia State University. I worked for an airline that no longer goes by the same name. I went to Middle Georgia Tech for a little bit, which is now Central Georgia Tech because it merged. I mean, everything on my resume, none of the companies exist in that capacity, and I'm only 30 years old. That's unfair. but but I digress. As far as database change management is concerned, getting back on topic, you really want to be proactive. You want to have the knowledge in place. You want to be able to plan and understand the impact that you're going to have on a company. What kind of automation can you put in place? What do you have to actually manually do? What are your standards? Again, this is all stuff that you should be taken in consideration as we're going to start getting into final project area, coming up with standard documents and what are the procedures for making database changes. Uh, Types of changes can be anywhere from the database management software, whether it's an upgrade or you're completely changing from, like, say, Oracle to SQL Server. There's hardware configuration, um, whether you're jumping between servers. In both of these scenarios with DBMS software and hardware configurations, that's one of my projects this year, is to move to Oracle 12 and to Red Hat Linux 6. So I'm literally moving between servers and software. So I'm having to actually live this right now. And I have lived through this before, because the first thing that I did when I was hired on Middle Georgia College was to move, basically upgrade from Oracle 10 to 11 and move from one server to another to accommodate these changes. There are logical and physical design changes that can be made. This could be anywhere from, let's say, for Banner, for instance, their vendor company that owns them, Illusion, uh, may push out an upgrade, and their upgrades tend to, they can vary depending on the level of severity, but some of them can be as intrusive as adding multiple columns to a table. And of course, that's going to have to change scripts. That's going to require uh, some level of overhaul. Applications, as far as front end, does it still accommodate things um, when stuff changes on the back end? Applications may have to change according to compatibility issues. Say, for example, if you use if you're sanctioned to use Internet Explorer 10, but 11 comes out, well, 11 may not be sanctioned yet, but it will be in the future, and you kind of have to accommodate that change. Um, your you may have tech support have to push out upgrades at some point when um, uh, basically life cycles end and support is discontinued. Um, and then physical design structures, as far as departments, your departments may completely and utterly change. You may have new departments come out. You may have divisions in departments. You may have departments merge with one another, and all of this has an impact on how your business and how your database and software interacts with them. Now, I kind of mentioned earlier. I think that might be the next slide. They're actually going back to last week's module, and we kind of discussed this a little bit, and I had to even uh, put an update on D2L that you had to do additional steps in order to get certain things to work. And so there are sometimes limitations on the alter statements. If you just want to change things, well, that might not be conducive or feasible, because you may have to drop foreign keys. You may have to change the infrastructure of the database. There are an abundance of reasons that it may be limited. I believe the textbook lists an option of you try to say that a table may have more free space, but if your server doesn't actually have that free space to accommodate that change, then you may run into errors, complications, and so on and so forth. Let's see. You may run into different situations where you may be testing in an environment and you make changes over time. You may change a dozen different parameters, but you do it over a span of several weeks. But then you decide, okay, I really want to make these changes into production now that I've shown that these changes are better in a test environment. But it may not be practical to change all 20 things with it in like 20 processes. You may actually be able to shrink that down and say, okay, well, I can actually make one change that makes all 20 changes all at once. I can automate this. I can manually do this. It may be actually something that can take place between shutdown and startup of a database. If your company doesn't run a 24/7 service, your database may be shut down at some time in the morning or during non-office hours, and you may have a parameter change, and you can just put that in the parameter file, and then when it boots up the next morning, it may already be there. Okay, now here's a scenario that we kind of actually dealt with when Banner had to change. Banner had a very big update where multiple, like pretty much every table took on 6 new fields to accommodate a, a a large change in the system as it was going from one version to another, and we're still actually feeling that because we're still uh, going to that new system. But in this particular scenario, this is a far simpler situation where you have the customer stable from our ITEC 4242 week 1 database that you see that I have added a middle initial field. Now let's say my scripts that end users use, or the application or whatever is in place, you may have an insert statement like the one below. And if you make the change to uh, the table, this insert statement will no longer work because you have not accommodated for enough fields. A better way of actually creating this insert statement would be to insert into customers, open parentheses, designate the fields that you're going to update: customer ID, last name, first name, address, and city, and close parentheses, and then do this query. That would actually function, and that would not cause errors or cause a break in the end user experience. Whereas if you don't accommodate for that and your code is like this, then stuff breaks. Now, as far as requesting changes, changes aren't automatic. Changes require some sort of level of downtime. Uh, there can be complications. There needs to be some sort of standardization, communication, coordination, and compliance that occurs when stuff changes. Um, as far as communication, you need to have your different departments be able to be like, okay, we need this. And if you're proactive, it should be, okay, we need this in the next week or the 2 weeks or in a month or whatever. And then you plan around it so that it causes the least downtime or intrusiveness on your end users, versus that of, we need it now, we need it tonight, it needs to happen. Sometimes that occurs and you can't avoid it, but you want to try to come up with standards to prevent that from happening. As far as requesting changes, it's kind of interesting because I have more experience of this probably more at the security level than I do at the application level, because we do have needs that occur both at the application level and at the database level, but normally those are kind of pushed out to us, and and we're told what is supported by the University System of Georgia. And so we try to accommodate that, and we plan around it, and we upgrade as necessary. And sometimes we'll get, financial aid or admissions that say, hey, we really need this. We need to really push this because there are some sort of requirements federally mandated that we need to accommodate, that the patches or upgrades accommodate for, and we work with everybody on that. And but as far as communication is concerned, it could be a ticketing, as small as a ticketing system. There could be emails. There could be meetings. It all really kind of depends on the scope. Um, as far as compliance is concerned, I have a lot of experience with this as far as dealing with auditors, both from on both sides of the spectrum, because I have been an auditor. Um, but on this side of the fence, on IT and being a database administrator, we have to be compliant with informing um, our end users of upgrades in the testing system to let them know, hey, we have stuff in test. Please test this out. We have this testing window that we want to accommodate by. Please make sure you do it by a certain date. If no other mention has occurred, we're basically going to take it as you have blessed this change and that we are going to go forward with it. Please communicate with us if there are complications. Tell us, that way we can put a stop to it, or we can put a delay on it so that it can be done in the future. Another compliance request change that comes in regularly would be banner permission changes. There are uh, different aspects of the application where it requires separation of duty, and sometimes we have forms and processes that we prevent people from using. We don't allow them to have access to unless they fill out a form, put in a ticket, and then we have to go to the right, basically managers, directors, and so on that own, like, quote unquote, own the data, that can say, well, they don't really need access to this. You can actually use this instead. Or, oh yeah, they probably do need this for this job. I approve this change. And this is all a matter of compliance. And I have to keep track of these emails, tickets, so on and so forth, so that, say, an auditor or some federal representative comes by and I can be like, here's where so and so said it was okay for it to change. Here's the request for it. That way we keep everything secure without compromising availability. And that's it. It's pretty straightforward this week. So please look forward to part 2 as I get into the modules dealing with triggers, procedures, and functions.